Welcome. Thanks everybody for joining our live Q&A State of Security with Dave Norlin. I'm Chris Vincent. I run marketing and demand generation at Datashield, and Dave Norlin's our CISO. And my goal here today is you wrote kind of an op-ed at the end of 2020, and I found it very compelling. Read through it. I had some questions for you, and I thought, hey, let's record this for everyone to see, and then also make it interactive. So for people that are attending, we want this to be live and interactive. I mean, everybody's muted, but please, there's a Q&A section. Drop your questions in the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. So if there's something that's pertinent to what we're talking about, I'll interject and bring your question up to Dave. If not, if it's a different topic, I'll hold it till the end. But please encourage you guys to ask Dave anything and everything. Dave told me you guys can try to stump him if you want. You know, he's ready. He's ready for it. So with that, we'll kind of get started now. So I want to start. I want to set the table, Dave. So we're going to get into talking about, specifically this SolarWinds sunburst breach. But before we get there was a big change for you last year, moving from running the SOC to actually CISO. And you did this during the middle of our COVID lockdown, or the COVID lockdown. What was that like for you? What was that transition like? I mean, just by itself, a big transition. And then the fact that we did it 100% remote. Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think it's probably one of the more awkward job transitions I've had in life. It was definitely something to where we already gotten adjusted to working from home, but taking on new responsibilities and kind of having a new outlook on the role that I have within the company was definitely a challenge. I would say it was definitely learning things from a distance in a weird way, if that makes sense, because now you're having to just kind of see them in concept via a web chat or remotely, which I think it is just a hard way to absorb anything. But thankfully, I have really great people that I was able to rely on. We have an outstanding management team in the SOC. I have an amazing director, and on the IT side, just really helpful people who can kind of made that transition a lot easier. So I wouldn't say that I transitioned alone. I would say that I transitioned with help, and I think that's probably true for any CISO. It's a lot to absorb, even for any size organization. It's a ton to try to parse through and figure out the priorities. So that I think that was probably the biggest challenge. Just seeing like what on a day-to-day basis is the most important thing for me to worry about, and relying on people that I could trust to kind of help me sort through the rest.
Got it. So, I mean, obviously super different from previous rule changes. Like in your in your mind, is there any way this could have been easier? I mean, did the remote thing really make that big of a difference, or was it just I'm moving from this role to a much higher role and I have to up my game from like a business perspective?
I mean, there's definitely that, but I would say there's a lot of face-to-face stuff that you can really use and kind of gauge people's opinions and help foster discussion face-to-face that you just don't have in a Teams chat, right? So much of what we do now is kind of confined to this narrow lane of interacting digitally, and I think there are viewpoints that people wouldn't share in those venues, even if you're really close with that someone or with that person. Sometimes they're not going to be conversational, or just kind of like mention something offhand that creates another idea, or maybe is a good solution for something. The whole interpersonal dimension, which I didn't think that I would really miss. I mean, miss is probably the wrong word, but you think you can do without that, and then over time, especially once you're managing people, it becomes almost necessary, and you start to miss that interaction. Especially among the managers and the people that you interact with every day. At least for me, I like to see them. I like to talk to them, and it's a lot harder now. Now that I can't just walk over to the SOC or walk over to somebody else's office. But that's part of the challenge. You figure out how to overcome that and work through it, and it all works out in the end. The day goes on, and life goes on, and here we are. We're still functioning, and in a lot of ways just as well, if not better than we were before. So,
Yeah,
I'll take the
I,
good.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Focus on the good. I mean, even with, and this is the last thing I'll ask on this, or kind of comment I'll make, and then we'll move on. But even with the Zoom and having the video version, it's like it's not quite the same. You miss some nuances. There's a little bit of lag. It's not the same as back when we were in the office. I could run over to you, hey, I got this great idea. You'd roll your eyes at me, or you come in and say, hey, you're screwing up or whatever. The nuance is missed. But luckily, like you and me have a good enough relationship where you can message me something, and I kind of know where your tone is, your heart is. But sometimes when you have new hires or people that maybe in the organization you don't interact with as much, it becomes a challenge when you're not face to face. I mean, no doubt.
Right. Yeah, it's something to where there's this organic process of brainstorming a problem or thinking about something, and then you talk to that person that you're working with, and then you walk down the hall and you have another idea, and that process either never takes place or is completely interrupted by the fact that we're all working from home. And until we can plug into some VR office, which I think might be kind of cool, I think we're going to have that sort of organic problem solving deficit that we have to figure out how to overcome in other ways. And I hate to say it, but sometimes it's just more meetings and just talking to people more. I find that I talk to certain people more than I did before because the quality of the interactions overall, digitally is maybe a little bit less. So I feel the need to try to talk to them, on a more frequent basis. So um, it's just one of the weird, evolutions of how we do business now, which we're all trying to get used to still. I see we did get a couple questions there.
Oh, yeah, there are. Let's pop in. Let's see before we jump on.
Sure.
Okay. Do you think, okay, so here, I'll read this for you, Dave. I know you can see it too, but do you think SOCs will become even more remote? Do you think it will help or harm the industry?
Yes, I think if they were not already trending to become remote, there will be even less of a reason to have an in-person or physical SOC in the future. I think the days of leadership looking at our SOC like it's and I say our SOC, the proverbial SOC going in and saying, "Oh wow, this looks like Star Trek. I'm so proud of this. How can we make it look even cooler?" I think that is going to forever be an artifact of whatever happened prior to 2020. I'll never forget, especially in the DoD, there was definitely like this earnest attempt to make it feel more like Star Trek. I think that is, we're going to look upon that fondly and maybe wish that we could go back to that, as stupid as it was in the moment. I think, those days are well past this. There's going to be very little business reason to do that, especially if you put the proper security controls in place and you just, make a really earnest effort to lock things down as much as you can, and that will just become the default, and everybody will continue to work from home. And I think, will it help or harm the industry? I think that it's definitely a double-edged sword. As far as efficiency and productivity, I think it will help. I think the SOC has been even more productive working from home because people cut out that 2-hour drive in some cases out of their day. They can work more fully without interruptions. I mean, as much as you and I would like to go to each other's desks, I know the SOC guys probably don't want me floating in and out asking them questions as much as I enjoy that. So yeah, I mean, there's less interruptions for people. So I think it will help. If there is harm, it's that the accountability game has to be even stronger. And you have to understand what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. And that's not to be invasive or to compromise their privacy. It's just a means of trying to make sure that we're operating efficiently. And that's just part of it. I mean, that's what we have to transition to. It doesn't matter what field of business you're in, whether you're in security or customer service or anything. It's, what are people doing when they're online? And we haven't had any problems with that really. I mean, I think we've managed that really, really well. So.
All right, great. All right, let's just keep rolling. I got some more questions on this train of thought from the attendees. Do you miss SecOps and the excitement of being on the front lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I miss being an analyst. I miss being a director, and I miss being a CTI manager, kind of like the whole chain of advancement. I think I miss every stage of that because, yeah, there is absolutely a lot of a lot of excitement to be had um, when you're in the process of trying to figure something out, especially if it's a large event like something like SolarWinds or Citrix or whatever the case may be. Um, I think it's a thing I will look fondly on and always wish that I was a part of more. So.
Awesome. Okay. And then let's do one more. The next one is actually kind of a little bit different topic, so we'll save that one. But one more. How has working remote affected employee morale and retention? What do you do as a CISO to keep up the morale and retain the valuable analysts, et cetera?
Yeah, that is a tough question, and I don't have all the answers here, but I would say one of the simplest things we try to do is just to get people together and we played video games every Friday. We blocked off a certain amount of time, worked it with the shift to ensure there was coverage, and really it was just an effort to try to get people together. And I think we're going to pick that up again this year, but people are having a lack of interaction. I don't see people as much. You don't see people as much. And I think everybody needs that venue to just kind of get to know the people that they work with outside of work. And there's no more going to lunch with people, at the drop of a hat. So you got to kind of create these instances where they can, be available emotionally and kind of interact. And I think just trying to keep the tone light in chat, joking around and as dumb as it is, people that work with me know that I like to just share stupid gifs and try to keep the flow of humor going. So I think that's an important part of it.
I know you're used to not goofing with me like that. That was like when we were going to do this event, and I recommended we do a cage match between you and one of the other CISOs. You didn't know if I was joking or not, so I think I have to work on my delivery. All right, let's move on. So I got a couple more questions in the chat. Let's hold those. I want to jump in and chat a little bit. I had kind of 4 questions for you, so I want to jump through and hit those, and we'll come back to you guys' questions and keep dropping them in the Q&A, guys. We'll come back.
Sure.
So in your op-ed, the one that you wrote, the 2021, the year of security decisiveness, you mentioned a shift in viewpoint on the industry assertion that the perimeter is dead. And so I want you to elaborate on, we've talked about this before. I want you to elaborate on this. Like, how did that mental shift for you happen?
Yeah, so this comes from the kind of repeated mantra that I was hearing a lot was that the perimeter was dead. And I really pushed back on that idea, in our internal discussions, because for the longest time, I felt like just a way to sell new products. And when people describe the perimeter being dead, they're talking about kind of the traditional model of an IT environment having this inside and outside zones with the DMZ and controlled ways for people to enter the environment and or to get information out of the environment in again a controlled way. And this notion that everything is dissolved, everything is bring your own device. We've broken down these models. Everybody's in kind of this hybrid environment. I thought that was a little preemptive. And I'll be the first to admit, I think that COVID and this whole work from home push changed my mind. I think we will always have a need for firewalls and those kind of boundary layer devices, whether it's a WAF or I think most people on the call probably know what a boundary layer device is. But I think now with everybody kind of operating in this very nebulous work from home kind of environment where a lot of people do have split tunnels or don't have the necessary controls on VPN access or something like that. I mean, there is no more boundary. I think we finally got there for better or worse, and probably for worse, at least in the near term, until we figure it out as an industry. But there's really no way you couldn't attack an organization. If you can locate the people and identify where they are, then you can attack their home network. I mean, all of this kind of bleed over between home networks, which were kind of the last vestige of privacy, if that can be imagined. You could set up your home network, and then that would be your center of control for the individual. You know what's on your network, ideally. And then now your employer has to worry about that too. So I don't think there is a great solution out there right now, aside from just locking down things like VPNs and other remote access or web services as much as possible until we either find a better solution for it, or we just virtualize literally everything. Everybody goes home with some kind of little pocket-sized thin client. I mean, I think that's probably what's going to eventually, it will eventually evolve into. But right now, as long as laptops can just connect to home Wi-Fi, I mean, it's the Wild West, right? So everybody's facing that right now. We've locked things down as much as possible, but we've implemented additional controls just to consider the possibility of something bleeding over from the home network into our own stuff. So we have to take that into account and be extra rigorous. So
That's great. And the thin client thing's interesting. It's like, what does that mean from like a hardware rollout perspective, and what's needed to support that internally? Actually, there's a question here in the chat that kind of goes along the same line. So I'm going to ask you this one right now. It says, how do you think cloud solutions / infrastructure will change based on working from home and when companies begin to roll back into the office?
yeah, I think the infrastructure itself won't change dramatically. I think the access to the infrastructure will be the thing that really changes. When you talk about like identity solutions, tracking who is actually interacting with cloud solutions, like that to me is going to be the big change, because and this really is a much bigger conversation, but that I think will slowly work its way into services such as our own. And this is something, in our own internal meetings, we talked about, what does does the definition of MDR start to break down when you look at things like identity, things like, just the general security of a cloud solution and the configurations that you need to implement? And is there a very real need for the services to kind of change and keep pace with the way cloud infrastructure has to be managed? I think, the fact that it's a work from home environment, like you could almost say the same thing for any type of system. The level of exposure increases. Your Azure admin or your AWS admin is working from home. That is the weak link. So now it's more of an identity discussion as much as it is a threat detection discussion. So I mean, you can say that they're kind of one and the same, but really it's just being aware of how people are interacting with your cloud solutions. The infrastructure, I mean, I don't envision it changing dramatically. I think if anything, people are going to say, well, we don't have an office anymore. Why do we have a data center? So, I mean, you probably didn't need a CISO to tell you that, but I think that is going to be the big push. And I hear that when we're talking to customers, the infrastructure of everything is going to the cloud, because people realize, why are we paying for an office and a data center? It's not necessary. It's actually a problem to have people go back into work now to look at something that's physical. So I think that should be your answer right there. And there's another question here that I think is related. CIS controls. You can read that one if you want. But
Yeah,
I think they're intertwined here.
I'll read it for the audience real quick. Yeah, CIS controls play a huge role in compliance. How do you track the progress and keep up with any changes that need to be implemented?
Yeah, so CIS controls, that would be something like inventory and kind of the continual assessment of risk and maintenance, and a lot of that is associated, in my opinion, with inventory and controlling what hardware is out there, and the configuration of that hardware, in addition to who has access to it. And I think you track progress by being extremely rigid with what hardware goes out the door, and the configurations on that hardware. I mean, now that we're distributed, now we're kind of all working from home, I think everybody needs a solution to lock down the devices that people take home. And that means like whole disk encryption and some of these other like TPM components that could potentially restrict access to the data and break the machine, or lock it down completely in the event that it goes misplaced. You would hope that in this time when we're not having a bunch of people roaming around, going to Starbucks and that kind of thing. But eventually the pandemic will end. Eventually people will be taking their hardware and their laptops places. And I think that is another emerging market that will, there will be a rush to fill that. And then, when it comes to tracking it, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, I think everybody's still trying to grow their own solution while also looking for other solutions. There's ways that you can track things in various cloud infrastructures. I think Azure Secure Score, just generically, is a good example of a vendor trying to put the checklist in front of people. And then there's other tools out there that can help you identify risk and track it over time. I mean, that's kind of a big question, but how do we track it? We have rigorous change management. We have extremely rigid vulnerability management. We talk about everything constantly and make sure that we're making the right decision. We regularly review tools and say, does this make sense to keep using? Does it not? And if not, why? What's the benefits of moving to something else? So there's a lot in there that it's a big question. I would say an Excel spreadsheet is better than nothing, but if you can do better, you should do it.
All right, good. Actually, let's ask this next. I'll ask you this next question too, because it's kind of in the same train of thought. It says, if companies have a bring your own device policy, should they require employees to download EDR software to their personal devices?
Yes, we have grappled with this for a couple different very specific scenarios. I think if it hasn't happened already, there will be a shift to just make that a part of the appropriate use or information security policy, where if you use a bring your own device, or if you choose to bring your own device, you are going to download the EDR tool of choice. And thankfully, a lot of EDR vendors have made that super simple. You can build a package specifically for those types of devices, and that's a common thing in a lot of EDR tools, and then give that package to the person to install on their own device, and then as soon as you see it check in the UI or via other means, and that they're kind of in the loop. And also the extending capabilities. People want to use a Linux machine or a Mac. Thankfully, EDR vendors are kind of getting to the point now where they are supporting those operating systems. Before, I think the classic case is a developer wants to use their Mac. Well, not all EDR tools are going to support a Mac, even still. But we're getting there to where this is less of an issue, and a lot of the major vendors will actually support them. So generically, if it were my choice, I would say yes. They should definitely be forced to download an EDR tool. Yeah, that should be the right way.
Okay, great. We got one more question here. Let's come back to this one though, in after a few other ones that I have for you. So, okay, number 3 I had for you, Dave. So, some time's passed since December, and we had the FireEye, SolarWinds, Sunburst, U.S. government compromise. There's been a lot of stuff that's come out. I want to get your take now that we've had about 30 days on it.
Yeah, this is still getting scarier, I think, by the day. I think this one is almost even hard to discuss because of the scope. I'll start off by saying I think the fog of war on this was kind of incredible. There was the realization that something significant had happened, and that there were a lot of, especially government agencies, that were affected. Of course, government agencies use the same tools everybody else does. So with that in mind, I think the community, and especially I can say for us, we were just chasing down every bit of available information, and also getting the sense that information was being very carefully guarded. And I understand that. I come from the DoD background. I understand there are operational security reasons that you can't say certain things. You can't really explain how you know certain things. So I do understand why the fog of war was seemingly so dense on this one. But at the same time, it's a difficult balancing act because we're trying to provide a service to customers, and we're trying to be on the cutting edge of whatever that information is, and we want to be able to be the authority and tell customers, hey, here's what you need to do, here's what we know. It's not necessarily about somehow discovering something that FireEye didn't know. That's not really what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the rapid conduit of information. So that was very frustrating. And I think a lot has come out. I have to give FireEye a lot of props, FireEye Mandiant, for their handling of it. I think they did as much as they possibly could in the moment. So, mad props to them. I think the second big narrative here is that everybody was unprepared. No matter what you hear in marketing material, everybody was unprepared. There is a reason that as we were investigating this in customers, we saw very conspicuous alerts suddenly pop up out of nowhere that no one had ever seen before, because they were adding those signatures in the heat of the moment. So I think on the one hand, the technology vendor narrative has been very interesting. Um, you have people saying, well, our tool caught it or would have caught it if you had just looked at that alert. And that's probably true. A lot of vendors can rightfully say, yes, that event was captured in something. And on the other hand, I would say, yes, and it also captured several other thousand or tens of thousands of events that were just as innocuous and just as easily passed over um, as the one that really mattered. So the problem that we're having right now, as an entire industry, I mean, literally everyone in the industry is trying to figure out how to sift through anomalies better than everybody else. And we, Datashield, can take away information from that and take away lessons. And as part of our development roadmap, that's something that we're trying to address as well. So I think everybody is going to be trying to solve that issue because, I mean, it's fine from a marketing perspective to say, oh, hey, we caught it, and here's how. But it's the bubbling up of that information. And there are some tools that do that better than others. And I think for those that do it really well, it's going to be a process of refinement. And for tools that are still lacking, it's going to be, okay, back to the drawing board. How did we miss this? And then how can we, like these other successful tools, bubble up the anomalies? From a Datashield perspective, we tend to really focus our anomalies on certain types of activity, things that are valuable when they hit the customer. We want to be able to be very precise and contextual and saying, okay, when this alert fires, it's good. You should pay attention to it. I mean, there's a lot of types of activity that would have fallen into this category that we, potentially would have had a lot of false positives for. We would have sent a lot of alerts constantly to the point that would have been almost unacceptable for someone to intake that volume of activity and that volume of stuff to look at. So we like everybody else are playing this balancing act of trying to bubble up the actionable stuff. In some cases, we do that really, really well, while also going really, really deep into this giant volume of data and pick out that, in some cases, that one firewall log that said, okay, you're affected. And it was just completely innocuous, contextless from the tool itself. And then, taking that bit of information and saying, okay, you're affected by the SolarWinds thing. It's a very complex problem to solve. And I think, through a couple of the partnerships that we have and that we're growing over 2021, I'm hoping that we can, get most of the way there. But it's a monumental problem for, everybody to solve. I mean, Microsoft, this organization with unlimited technical resources, is struggling with the exact same thing. So I think there's no one right answer on how to sift through these types of anomalies. And I think you don't have to be a giant organization to figure it out either. I think, this was a good call to action for us to look at how we're doing some detections and, kind of step back and change some of our processes. And change isn't easy, but I think, we're investing a lot in the R&D team this year. And I think there's ways that we can make it happen. So that's kind of my second bullet point on there. And I did write this down because I didn't want to forget it. Retention also became a huge issue with this, because this is one of those things that if it happened 6 months ago, who's going to know about it? Well, ironically, and I love this fact, this is like one of the beautiful ironies of the security world, is that all these people who had these legacy SIMs, and legacy in quotes, people love to say legacy SIMs or traditional SIMs, whatever. All those people that were still storing data for going years back, they were just fine. We could go into those tools and say, okay, yes, you had an instance of this based on these new IOCs, you were indeed affected by it. Here's what to do. Whereas some of these, some other customers had issues because they didn't have the retention, or that they were using a tool that only went back, 30 or 60 or 90 days. And so that the retention game here is still weirdly, being won by the traditional SIM players. So it's just kind of a nugget that I took away from that, is even though there's this big push to move away from SIMs or whatever we conceived the SIM to be at one point in time, kind of the data repository, there is still value in that when you have these supply chain attacks. So, or just an attack that has been ongoing for a long time and no one knew about until 6 months later. So that's my very long-winded answer on that one.
No, that's good. I queued you up before we were talking about this, so I wanted you to have a chance to think about it. I mean, just for a quick answer on this, I mean, I heard this morning on another webinar. What impact is this having on the industry? Just, what's this going to do to the industry, you think? Or is it not, is it just going to be more of the same? What are your thoughts?
It's going to be, I think, for the right kind of company, it's going to be a shock to the system, or at least um, yet another nudge toward being even more proactive and being more aggressive in how you figure out, like I said, the anomaly detection stuff, because that's really what it boils down to. Tough nut to crack, that everyone's still trying to figure out. And then, sadly, I think a lot of stuff is going to be more of the same, more of the ambulance chasing and saying, oh well, if you had our product, this wouldn't have happened, which is sadly a really common thing to see at a time like that. Which oftentimes those claims are pretty unfounded, and that is the industry. So I think
Sure.
you're going to see change in the right way, and also change in people's mindsets. I mean, the um, the barrier to action. So we often talk about response. That notion of response has always kind of made people cringe. They don't like to think about someone automatically taking actions in response to things. And I think that apprehension is being eroded really quickly. Every time we have another big breach, I don't want to think about it. I just want to, I love this anecdote from a customer. I just want to DDoS myself. I want to stop the thing in its tracks, figure it out later. So I think we're getting into this realm where the kind of shoot first and ask questions later, from a defense perspective, it is becoming kind of the thought in the back of people's minds. What if this did happen to me? I would rather just blow it away and kind of pick up the pieces later and not have a major incident. So I think that there's going to be some interesting discussions on the SOAR and response side of things.
Okay. Let's switch gears here. There's a couple kind of more Datashield focused questions and one more about you. Let's jump into these real quick, Dave. So this one says Datashield is becoming a demiurgic. Is that how you say it? Demiurgic?
Demiurgic, I think.
Demiurgic. Okay. As a powerful creative force entity in the security space. How is Datashield? So Datashield is becoming a powerful creative force in the security space. How is Datashield adapting to serve the customer base?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'll never I'll never present us in a way that is not as accurate and honest as I can be. And I would say we are still a small company. That said, we are very aggressive in trying to change in the direction that we need to be. And I think if I've had one legacy in my I think now barely 6 months 7 months as a CISO, it's that I'm not afraid to push us and be as aggressive as possible in trying to change the direction. And at times that's landed more work on your plate, Chris. But I think we have a responsibility to be aggressive in our desire to bring in more capability, and whether that means new partners or investing in R&D like we are, which is something I'm really excited for in 2021. It's being nimble and being decisive, and that was one of the kind of I think underlying narratives, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to write that op-ed at the end of the year, is that I was thinking 2021 is going to be an interesting year. What's the best that we can do and really it's just being as focused and aggressive as we can. If it means something isn't working, if there's a policy that is not functioning the way it should be or not returning value, dump it and move on. I do not believe in any kind of sunk cost fallacy. I think it's never too late to change for the better. And again, it may mean technology, it may mean the strategy of things. You try something for 3 or 4 months. If it's not returning value, let's change. Let's pick a new direction. And then also, being an absolute thorn in our side or a thorn in the side of our president, and kind of demanding things that I need to change our service for the best. And thankfully, he's never told me no. So I have to give props to Jimmy on that one. But R&D is one of the big changes in 2021, kind of expanding that out and without giving too much away, I would say at this point, really turning Shield Vision into something more than just an internal SOC tool.
Yeah, I would just to add to what you're saying, Elon Musk just had a quote out about Too many presidents, CEOs are focused on board meetings and numbers, and they're not focused on the service. And he said that has to change. And when I read that, I immediately thought about like you and Jimmy on he, even though he's very much a financials guy and he's great at all that stuff, he's really focused on making sure the service is top notch. So when I have conversations with him, it's, you know, you got to do better at saying what we do so well. It's really about the service in his mind. I think that's kind of rare, especially for a lot of presidents at his level.
Yeah, I think one of the best traits of a leader is listening to the people who know best. I mean, there are times when I have to listen to my people in the SOC because they're close to the technology. They're always working with it. If they have a better idea on how to do something, it's really my responsibility. It's my duty to listen to them and kind of elevate those concerns or whatever the case may be. That's a core function, I think, at every stage in management.
Absolutely. I got another question here. This is about you, Dave. So, as a CISO, would you say you are technically oriented or technical oriented, aka TISO, or policy oriented, aka BISO, or strategically oriented, aka CISO?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the security provider space is maybe one of the only places where the definition of a CISO really gets kind of wacky. I would say I have to be all of those things to a degree, but especially being in the MDR space and security provider space, I think I have to be kind of a blend of technical and strategy, and that's really the role I play with customers. I really enjoy that technical strategy discussion of here's the issue, how can we walk you through or navigate you through a transition in technology or improving your own security posture. It is almost to a degree a little bit of a consulting role, or some might define it as a sales role. I think it's a little bit more advisory, which is the role of a CISO in a security provider that in a security providing organization. That person, I am helping define what the policy or what the service looks like, and that service has to align with the direction customers are heading. If that means a change of technology or a change in how we do things, then that's the kind of discussion I need to have. And oftentimes that is kind of a strategy discussion, but it's also a very technical discussion when you're looking at different technologies and saying, okay, what are the pros with technology X versus technology Y, and why should I pick one? So I think I definitely would be have my foot in both camps there. Policy, obviously, I have to deal with that internally on a pretty constant basis, but that's one of those things where I do have regular discussions with our technical personnel and just try to ensure that we're doing the absolute best we can from an internal security perspective.
All right, cool. So technical slash strategy,
Yeah.
CISO. We got one more here in the chat. Let's do this one now, Dave. What
Mhm.
capabilities are in development that help customers develop metrics on events, especially when it comes to MTTD and MTTR?
Yeah. So mean time to detect and mean time to respond. I would say, and I regret to say that I have been saying this too long, but we have definitely built all the metrics. They are, exportable. We're using them internally to try to refine how they look. And I actually have a meeting later this week, tomorrow, to go over the final iteration of what that looks like. And then, the goal is to make those all visible within the customer portal. So that puts us on blast for sure, as to our own performance. I think it's part of being a transparent service and a good service provider to make that information available. And as you can imagine, we have to go through a lot of iterations. I mean, it does go back quite a ways on a metrics discussion. Is one of the hardest things that we've had to tackle here at Datashield is figuring out what's important to people. And a lot of times it is kind of that performance type metric out of the SOC. And thankfully, we have a lot of different ways because of the ticketing system that we're using to look at different stages of response within a ticket. So whether it's detection or response, or even actually the time to qualify an incident and then get that to the customer, those are all different stages that we're tracking. And And as I've been saying, I hate the fact that I've been saying this for a while, but it's something we've really had to dial in and get right. We are going to make those available to everybody within the portal. That is the plan.
Great. Let's come back to this. There's one more question. Let's come back to this in a second. Well, actually, we got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna hit two more for you, Dave, and I'll get the brief version from you.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you. We talked about this a lot before. You talked about tools blurring together.
Yeah.
You know, I heard you mention it. How important do you think this is that companies merge security vendors together in 2021?
Yes, I will give you my super fast 2-minute answer on this. If you look at the Gartner triad, a thoughtful observer will see 3 different problems to solve. You have 3 different technologies that all need to be kind of cohered into a security platform. That middle of the Gartner triad, everyone is still trying to struggle with. And I think that will be something that's very important for us to solve in 2021. That's one of the reasons that we are trying to build out the R&D team, is to solve that tool issue. And as those tools get more and more complicated and more complex, you're going to see even more overlap between them. So from an operational perspective, we're trying to solve bringing those tools together. And from a technology vendor perspective, I think eventually there's going to be some consolidation. Everyone wants to build the XDR agent, the super agent that ingests everything. I think we're a long ways away from that being actually viable. I think implementation wise, there's a lot of hoops to get over and make that viable. The idea is there. So, from a market perspective, everybody wants that. It's going to take some time to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's so being unbiased. I mean, how does a company go about doing that? I mean, how do they go about doing a self audit on that kind of thing?
You said doing a self audit on that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, how does a company look at themselves and figure out, like, how do I consolidate these things? Like, what's an unbiased way, rather than coming to a provider like us and having us help?
Yeah, I would say, are you paying for functionality that you haven't used? Is probably if I were in that position, I would say, what have I paid for that I haven't utilized? And then do I really need it? And is that important to me? What's my return on investment for that tool?
That's perfect. That's good. Okay, we got a couple minutes left. Do you have any thoughts on this question here about, if you want to elaborate on this, what's going on? I'm unfamiliar with this.
Yeah, so Emote was recently brought down, or I should say disrupted. I don't know. I don't speak Ukrainian for one, so I don't know the full details. I've only read the kind of the release, and I watched the video of these Ukrainian police breaking into this apartment building where presumably someone was there who was heavily involved in the Emotet campaign. Obviously, Emotet is one of the biggest malware threats out there, banking Trojan, with a lot of different modules and functionality. So I would say I think it's very interesting, the cybersecurity evolution within Ukraine. They've been kind of the battlefield for a lot of really advanced tactics, kind of trialed by Russian actors and those kinds of things against Ukraine. A very famous supply chain attack took place against the Ukrainian tax firm who had their software compromised. So I think it's great for Ukraine. It sends a great message for them to be kind of on the forefront, being aggressive and trying to handle those kinds of things. If you have some kind of cancerous growth within your borders that you can solve, it's in the world's best interest to then go and be aggressive and try to cut it out and disable it. So good on them. I will be very curious to see if Emotet kind of trends downward. I think maybe that one is a little more multi-headed than people give it credit for. So I would expect someone else will probably try to pick up the development of that and carry it on. I don't think it's going to go away completely.
All right, perfect, Dave. Well, we got 1 minute left, so I guess I need a 1 minute response from you. This is my last question for you. You crystal ball this year. Can you predict something? Major breach, major attack, shift in the industry? Just give us your off the cuff. What's going to happen in 2021?
My crystal ball prediction is that there will be another major breach in 2021.
I'll take it. I'll give you.
I hate
I'll give you.
but I think that will be 100% accurate. You can take it from the bank.
All right. And with that, we're at time. I appreciate everybody joining the webinar. I appreciate all the questions. And Dave, thank you for taking the time, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.